We're on the final stretch of the life of Joseph here. As we're going through the unfair advantages of his life, we all know that if you've been following up with what's been happening, we're on week 6. We got one more week after this left, and you're super sad because we're almost done, right? Exactly. Okay. But if you haven't been able to keep up with the story, we know that the life of Joseph is extremely tragic with everything that he goes through. But in it, we find unfair advantages that you and I as believers can share with and understand where God is even leading us as people, as a church, as individuals in our community. And learning from him really changes our perspective in life in general and how we see things. We finally, after years of hardship, we begin to see Joseph moving towards the position that God intended for him to have all along. Last week, we watched Joseph stand before Pharaoh. He's able to interpret the dreams, but something remarkable happens in the moment that we did not see coming. We thought that everything ended at the interpretation of the dream, but that's not the case at all. God does not just give Joseph the interpretation. We also see him get this supernatural wisdom all of a sudden. And he knows exactly how to develop the plan that would save an entire nation. We see Joseph saying, God will give you the interpretation of the dream. Tell me what it is. He is given the dreams, and then he goes on to tell Pharaoh what they mean. And not only that, he says, therefore, you should find a man who is able to do these things. So he went from being able to interpret dreams to now having the wisdom to know what to do as those dreams come to fruition. But think about how long this journey has already been. For those of us who like to look at our lives and say, man, I'm in it for the long haul, Pastor. God has taken me through this journey. It is difficult. I don't know when we're supposed to be getting out of this thing. I don't know how we're going to rebound for this. Joseph was only 17 years of age when his brothers sold him into slavery. For 13 years, he lived as a slave and a prisoner. 13 years of waiting, 13 years of disappointment, 13 years of wondering when God will fulfill the promise that he was given. And then before we know it, everything very quickly changes in his life. And then you get verse 41 and 44. We're going to be in chapter 41 of the book of Genesis today. And in verse 41, we see this text that said, Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the entire land of Egypt. Then verse 44 says, and Pharaoh said to him, I am Pharaoh, but no one will lift a hand or foot in the entire land of Egypt without your approval. And you say, Mama, we've made it. Joseph has finally arrived. He is at his destination, exactly where God wanted him. But what a turnaround. God doesn't just rescue Joseph from prison. He positions him for influence. And I think there's a lesson for us to learn here. Because a lot of us go through the seasons of life that we're facing. And many of our lives, we're constantly praying to God. And our prayers sound something like, God, get me out of this thing. Get me out of this job. Get me out of this financial situation. Get me out of this difficult season that I'm facing personally. Get this pain away from me. And I believe that perhaps our greatest prayer shouldn't simply be the one of desperation for what we're facing. Maybe we should be seeking God to understand what is it that God is actually preparing us for during this season. Should we always be so desperate about what we're facing to the point where we're saying, God, please get us out? Or should we take a step back in a moment and say, wait a second, God, what is it that you're trying to prepare me for? Because I believe God is not simply trying to move you from something. I believe that he is preparing you and moving you to something. Okay? And frankly, you and I were built for more than just survival. The reality is, as you sit here today, whether you believe it about your life or not, you are built for significance. God created you that way, and he wants that for your life. You're like, Pastor, are you giving us some kind of inspirational message? Yes, but I'm telling you the truth. It's what this book says. He has set us aside, completely, marvelously made, right? Complex is what we read in the text a few weeks ago. understanding that there is something a little bit bigger of significance that is supposed to take care of our lives in one way that we never saw coming. But significance, to understand it, comes with a lot of responsibility. We see Joseph moving from surviving hardship to learning how to steward the new influence that he's now being given. And while this sounds amazing on paper and we all say he made it, the reality is that this was a risky transition for his life. Because it's one thing to survive prison, but it's a completely different thing to successfully lead a nation afterwards. However, we very quickly in his life begin to see God start to work. And that risk that we might have saw in the beginning begins to work out on his benefit. So much so that Pharaoh gives him a new Egyptian name. He also gives him a wife. And in verse 45 and 46, the Bible says that Joseph took charge of the entire land of Egypt. He was 30 years old when he began serving in the court of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And when Joseph left Pharaoh's presence, he inspected the entire land. He had finally arrived. The dream for his life had finally come true. If you've been here for the last 5 weeks, this is kind of refreshing. You know the story, and we just have been building to this moment and building to this moment. But it has felt so far like Joseph takes 2 steps forward and 3 steps backwards. Where he is gaining favor, but then something bad happens. He gains favor, and then he ends up in prison. He gains, But in this case, we're starting to see the story come to fruition, and now everything is coming true. And you say, well, if everything is happening here on verse 45 and 46, Pastor, now what? And that's exactly the question that I want to drive home today. If we are really heading somewhere, if God is delivering us from something, if the blessing is on its way, if there is something supernatural happening in our lives, if the promise and the dream is finally coming true, what are you going to do when you get there? What then? I love the idea. I used to be a youth pastor long time ago. I know I look super young. I know. But I used to be a youth pastor, and they were super intrigued about money, okay? And I put this money up on the board, and I would say, okay, I'm going to give you $5 million. What would you do with it? And these teenagers are like, perfect, I'll buy a car. I'd be like, I have a $50,000 car. And I'm just up there doing the math for them. And I would say, what else? I'll buy my mom a house. $300,000. Back then it was $300,000. You know what I mean. $300,000. I do the math. And what else? And then little by little, I just kept asking, and eventually the room went silent. There's millions of dollars. I know they wouldn't be you. You would know exactly what to do with the $5 million. But they would run out of things to say. And it's important for us to understand, because we get so focused on the blessing we want and the destination that we want to get to, we're not even sure if we're ready to be there in the first place anyway. If we were to ask ourselves the question, will I know what to do when I arrive? We wouldn't know what to say. Some of us will know segments of what we would do when we get there, but not all of us would have the wisdom and understand exactly what it is that God has equipped us to do when we do arrive. So I want to ask you that question today to get you to kind of just do a self-assessment and say, okay, if God were to do all these things in my life and these things that I'm praying God about and the things that I'm seeking Him for were to actually take place, then what? Would you know exactly what to do after the fact? Are you ready for the fulfillment of the dream, and do you know what to do when you get there? Because church, here's what often we miss. Getting to the palace wasn't Joseph's greatest challenge. Making it wasn't it. Leading from the palace would be. Getting the position and the title wasn't what was going to carry him the rest of the way. I would say that position is pretty stressful. We may look at the blessing of Pharaoh saying you would be in charge of everything. I would lose my mind. It's not about putting the title on your chest and saying, I am this now. It's what are you going to do with what you've been given? Are you ready to utilize the blessing that you're praying for? The position, the promotion. Okay? Now, it's one thing for God to open a door, but it is a whole other thing to know what to do after you walk through it. Joseph is no longer interpreting dreams. Now he has to rely on a new skill because opportunities can be given in a moment, but they are sustained through wisdom in the long run. Today, I want to talk to you about the advantage of wisdom. Okay? Any wise people in the room? They're like, Pastor, I'm trying to be humble, but since you asked. The Bible mentions the word wisdom over 200 times. Okay? I just want you to know, and the person next to you needs to know, that wisdom is something that you need. It's not a negotiable. You may say, Pastor, but this person next to me, they're not the smartest. We're not talking about that, okay? Everyone in this walk of faith needs wisdom. In fact, I believe God intentionally is trying to develop our characters so we know how to respond to situations with wisdom. As I get older, gray hairs everywhere. I hear that it's all wisdom, right? Related. But we see one of the books in the Bible that is known for wisdom is the book of Proverbs. And the book is actually written by one of the wisest men of his time. And one could even argue that he was the wisest man to ever live apart from Jesus. And the book opens up by telling us, when we read it, that if we were to read the book and put the words that we read in it to practice, we could too learn wisdom. However, when most of us do the assessment around the room, and we begin to define the word wisdom, we pair it up with the word knowledge instead. But the Hebrew word, and I want you to say Hebrew, you're going to learn Hebrew with me. Not Hebrew, but you know what I'm saying? I'm going to tell you the Hebrew word and you're going to repeat it. Say this word with me. I want you to say it with me, okay? Hakma. Okay? Hakma. Yeah, it's easy. You're trying, I get you. When we look at that word in Hebrew, it just means so much more than that. It's not just knowledge. It's not just mental activity. It refers to action. Okay? It's about skilled living. It's about applied knowledge. It's what you do with what you know. And the entire purpose of the book of Proverbs is to help us develop a set of practical skills of living well in God's world. And the key ingredient is what? Hakma. Wisdom. Wisdom. Okay? I don't know if I'm saying that right. I know you're going to correct me on the way out. I get it, okay? You get the point. Why wisdom? Why not knowledge? Pastor, can I just read the book with the 10 steps that get me to the destination? No, it's different. Knowledge tells you something is true. Wisdom tells you what to do with that truth, okay? Knowledge is what you know. Wisdom is knowing what to do with what you do know, all right? Joseph knew what Pharaoh's dream meant. However, wisdom showed him how to save the nation because of them. You see the difference? And that's why wisdom is so valuable. The truth is that when we don't know the purpose of something in our lives, what's option number one? Misusing it. What we don't know, when we don't know the purpose of something, as believers in Jesus Christ, the first thing we learn to do is to misuse the gift. We don't know what to do with it, so what do? We think that we should use it in this way, okay? And go our lives that way. Our dreams may open doors, our favor may create opportunities, even our character can sustain us through very difficult hardship, but wisdom teaches us how to steward what God actually places in our hands. That's really important. That's really important. Okay? Now, if the blessing is on its way, we need to know what to do when it gets here. And I believe that all of us need to just kind of understand that that's going to require us to move into a different sort of dimension with God. Okay? Here's what I know. It's not here yet. Why? Because you're not ready for it. That's the bad news. Band-Aid ripping moment. I know. You're mean, Pastor. I know. I'm so mean. It's not here yet because we're not ready for it. There's a ton of things in my life that aren't here yet, and I don't like using that statement to justify it, okay? It hurts me just as much as it hurts you, okay? But I know if the blessing that God promised in my life is not here yet, I'm not ready for it. Can we be okay with that statement? We need to know what to do with it when it gets here. However, it is our choice whether we develop and prepare for what is next. You want me to give you a difficult verse? I'm going to give it to you. Proverbs 1:22, the beginning part of that verse, Solomon said, "Oh, how long, O simple ones, will you love being simple?" Okay? And unfortunately, many of us in our relationship with God, that's where we remain. That's the level of simplicity that we carry in our walk of faith. Okay? It's not an attack. It's just part of it, right? God is all-knowing. He's all-powerful. I don't have to do anything. He's going to do whatever. Well, I think that it gets to the point where at times we need to get over the fact that we don't have to think through it. God's got it. I do believe that God is trying to develop our character, okay? And we have to come to a point in our lives where we say enough is enough, for us to get over this acceptance mentality and this complacency that we have as believers and begin to pursue the insight of God in the journey that we're in. Amen? You guys are quiet. Is everybody okay? Everybody's okay? You're listening or you're falling asleep? It's okay. Joseph doesn't just define wisdom. In this story that we're going to be reading today, in this section of his story, he actually demonstrates it for us and the effects that it has, okay? Because, and I'm going to get right to it. Number one, wisdom sees beyond today, okay? Here's where it says in verse 47 to 49, chapter 41, verse 47 to 49. As predicted, for 7 years, the land produced bumper crops. During those years, Joseph gathered all the crops grown in Egypt and stored the grain from the surrounding fields in the cities. He piled up huge amounts of grain like sand on the seashore. Finally, he stopped keeping records because there was so much to measure. Okay. And we see this place and we think, man, the 7 years of abundance must have been nice, especially for Joseph as a leader. We think, wow, this is nice. This is exactly what the dream was talking about when it comes to his life, right? And during these 7 years of abundance, Joseph begins to gather up all this grain throughout Egypt to store it away. This took focus and skill on his part because you would think that, what do we do when we get a blessing? If you were to get $50,000 in your bank account tomorrow, what would you do with it? You would probably find a way to spend some of it, okay? I'm not going to throw you out there and say you're going to spend all of it, okay? I know you're going to save a lot. I know you're going to give a tithe. I know. So I know. But if you receive this money, right? Or money, blessings, I just use money because everyone relates to it, okay? Now, when you look at it from his perspective, you think Joseph is the one responsible for managing the blessing itself. Okay? And we see his perspective on it. It's taken him effort and skill to be able to be focused on what it is that he's supposed to do with it. Now, what do you think everybody else saw? Everyone else saw abundance. Everyone else saw provision. Everyone was celebrating today's harvest. There was nothing in their mind to prompt them to think anything outside of that. Joseph doesn't have the same privilege because wisdom ends up showing him something completely different, even in the season of provision. When he is being blessed, okay, he understands that there is something or another layer that he's supposed to seek after and understand based on what the dreams meant. A lot of us take the blessing at face value. Joseph sees responsibility. Joseph prepares for tomorrow's famine, and he knows something is coming along the way that I need to be ready for. That, my friend, is wisdom. And we should all pray for it, because wisdom refuses to live for today. Instead, wisdom asks, how is today's decision affecting my tomorrow? What is it about the steps that I am taking in my life that are affecting my life tomorrow? For example, a farmer doesn't wait until winter to build a barn. They do it prior to, because winter is coming. Now, I'm not using the reference to that show. I know it came out that way. A family doesn't begin to save after the economy crashes. Healthy marriages don't wait until conflict appears before prioritizing better communication. Well, some maybe do. Maybe I've changed that one. But for the most part, and I wrote it this way because I found it so important, is that preparation is faith wearing work boots. Seriously. It's not about living in fear. Joseph wasn't fearful. He was faithful. He was a good steward to the season that he was in. Okay? Because wisdom prepares before panic. Okay? Before panic ever arrives. It's not reactive, it's proactive. And church, I think we need to step back and think of the things that we're asking God for beyond the moment of the blessing. Because I would be honest with you, and a lot of us will raise our hands to say, when we pray to God, we are praying to God for a specific thing, and that prayer ends right there. We don't pray beyond the moment of deliverance. We don't pray beyond the moment of provision. We don't pray beyond the moment of healing. So what do we do when it actually gets there? Life doesn't stop. The hardest thing about life is that it's what? Daily. We have to get up every morning, do it all over again. Monday's coming, okay? Now, wisdom prepares you before the panic actually arrives. Sometimes God blesses you in one season only so you'll have enough strength to endure the next season. The blessing isn't always for immediate consumption. Sometimes it's preparation. I'm part of an organization that many years ago ended up winning or classifying for the Inc. 500 magazine. That means that we were one of the fastest growing companies in the entire nation. We were listed in the magazine number 138 out of the entire nation. And while I was looking at the magazine, our name, our little paragraph, I felt super proud. We made it. I realized that we were in more debt than we have ever been. That we were struggling. The morale internally was destroyed because in order to keep up with the demand, we were having to go into debt for equipment and do all kinds of stuff that was extremely aggressive. Okay? So while it looked like a blessing from the outside, it was only preparation for the next season of what God had intended for our lives. People from the outside saw the harvest. They saw provision. We're high-fiving down the hallway, but deep down inside, we knew how much money was in the bank account. We knew what debt we had gone into. And while the season looked healthy and promising, yeah, you know what that Inc. 500 article got us? Access to more debt if we wanted it, because we were one of the fastest growing companies in the U.S. So when you start looking at things from this perspective, you realize that wise people think beyond the moment. It's not that you're never satisfied. It's not that you're always looking for the next thing, but preparation prevents panic. Joseph prepared during the abundance because he knew that tomorrow would be a little bit more difficult. You can't just look at your life and say, today is what it is. No, you got to see past it, especially as it relates to your blessing. However, not everything is preventative. Number 2, wisdom turns influence into impact now. Okay? This is what happens. We're going to jump to verse 53 and 57. Okay? At last, the 7 years of bumper crops throughout the land of Egypt came to an end. Then the 7 years of famine began. Just as Joseph had predicted, the famine also struck all the surrounding countries. But throughout Egypt, there was plenty of food. Eventually, however, the famine spread throughout the land of Egypt as well. And when the people cried out to Pharaoh for food, he told them, go to Joseph and do whatever he tells you. So with severe famine everywhere, Joseph opened up the storehouse and distributed grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe throughout the land of Egypt. And people from all around came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe throughout the world. God's goal is not only to bless you personally or to bless us personally with the things that he gives us. He's not spoiling us as his children. He also wants to make an impact of blessing through your life for other people. And the famine finally arrived. Just as God had said, the crops stopped growing, the surrounding nations began starving, people become desperate, and now Joseph possesses enormous authority. But notice what he does with it. He doesn't use his influence to elevate himself. He uses it to preserve other people. He doesn't look at his blessing as saying, me, we're good here, Rosie. Lock up the doors, close the blinds, nobody's coming in. He decides, how is it that my influence could be impactful in a life today? And he takes the resources and the benefits that he has been given in order to make an impact in the lives of others. That is kingdom leadership. Okay? It's a kingdom leadership that is about stewardship, not control. Joseph uses his power and resources to protect people, not to manipulate them or take advantage of them. This world is full of the latter. And you know what I believe, right? Leadership without love is what? Manipulation. Most of us have been given tools, have been gifted in areas of our lives. And we take those gifts and we take those blessings and use those things to only benefit ourselves. And I'm telling you that gifting, that blessing, that provision that is yours today has been given to you, and it's meant not only to make an impact in your life, it is meant to make an impact in the lives of other people. Joseph would have survived. He would have been fine. But he uses his power and resources to protect people, not to take advantage of them. God never blesses us simply so that we can live lives more comfortably. He's always blessing us so someone else's lives can become better. And if you don't notice it in your life and you haven't seen the result of this, you have missed it. Every position of influence is an opportunity for stewardship. It doesn't matter what position you're in. Parenting, business owners, teachers, pastors, managers, grandparents, you name it. You have been gifted and positioned by God to make an impact, not in your life, but in the life of other people. This faith is about the business of people, not buildings and organizations. We are an organism with people, for people. Eternities on the line, with a broader, deeper meaning that goes beyond the simplicity of our day-to-day. Every interaction, every encounter matters. Every platform God gives us was designed to serve people, not impress them. Joseph's influence became someone else's survival. And this made his new given power not only influential, but impactful in the life of other people. If I were to ask you something in the second point, I would say, where is your influence today? Who are you influencing? And when you identify that influence, is it causing a positive impact in the life of the people now? However, you say, Pastor, you asked me that question and I have no influence. Okay? There's a prescription for that, okay? You say, if I have no influence, Pastor, you're wanting me to make an impact now. How can I make an impact if I have no influence? Let's take it back a little further because I do believe that God, the wisdom grows before it shows. And I do think that God often delays influence to allow maturity to catch up. Okay? This is what he says, and we read this, and this is going to sound off the wall, but it's still verse 50 to 52, and it's going to tell us a lot about Joseph's maturity. It says, during this time before the first of the famine years, 2 sons were born to Joseph. Verse 51, Joseph named his older son Manasseh. Okay? For he said, God has made me forget all my troubles and everyone in my father's family. Joseph named his second son Ephraim. For he said, God has made me fruitful in the land of my grief. Okay? These names reveal something to us. We are able to understand by these names that a change took place in the life of Joseph. You say, Pastor, what change actually took place? Well, this guy at 17 years old was dreaming about people bowing before him. At 30 years old, he's talking to us about the faithfulness that God has over his life. See the difference? That's maturity. He's understanding things from a different scope. Not that the dreams weren't real, not that people weren't going to be bowing before him according to his dreams, but God has a way of working out our destination a little bit different than we may see. You may not know, because God is still developing you. God spent 13 years developing the man before he revealed the platform to him. Before he got the palace, he spent 13 years shaping him, forming him, designing him. God will make sure that you are the version of yourself that he has aligned for such a time as this. We know it because our character. We want things now. We celebrate the platforms. But God is more worried about developing you than he is about the provision that he's going to give you. You catch it all the time in churches. Nowadays, I say it all the time, we see church growth by church transfer. And a lot of people transfer from churches because they're happy and joyful, right? No. They transfer churches and because at times they're hurt. And then they have that PTSD towards me as a pastor because they're waiting for me to transform into that version of that pastor that they dealt with. If I say a comment, they'll say, there it is, he's coming. He's going to transform. But immature people keep rehashing old wounds. But wise people learn to live and celebrate God's healing. And Joseph doesn't name his children revenge. He names them healing. He doesn't live looking backwards anymore. No. He now lives seeing God's hand even in the suffering. We see even David attest to this later on. Centuries later about Joseph's lives. In Psalms 105, 16 to 22, I'm going to read it really fast. It says, David says, he called for a famine on the land of Canaan. He's talking about God. Cutting off the food supply. Then he sent someone to Egypt ahead of them, Joseph, who was sold as a slave. They bruised his feet with fetters and placed his neck in an iron collar. Until that the time came to fulfill his dream, the Lord tested Joseph's character. Then Pharaoh sent for him and set him free. The ruler of the nation open his prison door. Joseph was put in charge of all the king's household. He became ruler over all the king's possession. Why? Verse 22. He could instruct the king's aides as he pleased and teach the king's advisors. Verse 22 in another translation says, to bind his princes at his pleasure and to teach his elders wisdom. David said, God allowed the suffering in Joseph's life until the time came. So much so that the Lord tested his character throughout the process. Think about that. Joseph being raised up to bring wisdom not only to his life, but the people that he encountered. To be able to bring solutions and practical things that needed to be done in the season that the people were facing. But Joseph thought he was just being taken for granted, a slave. And now David said God is teaching him and others wisdom all along. That is because everything Joseph endured became part of God's classroom for his life. And in this classroom, God is able to prepare him before he shows him. Okay? Church, I wonder how many of us are sitting in God's classroom right now. As you sit here this morning and reflect, I wonder how many of us are actually sitting here in the middle of the class right now in this moment, learning what it is that God wants to do in your life. How could anyone say they're not? We're all learners first and leaders second. However, I do believe that in this season, while we sit in the classroom of God, would you say, we spend too much time asking for the wrong thing. Because most of us are spending the majority of our time saying, God, end the lesson. And God is just trying to prepare the student. That's why maybe the door isn't rejection. The closed door isn't rejection. Maybe it's refinement. Maybe God's saying no is maybe not yet because I'm still teaching you wisdom. James 1:5 says, if you need wisdom, ask our generous God and he will give it to you. He will not rebuke you for asking. You know what James doesn't say? James doesn't say, ask for more influence. You're ready for the platform. He doesn't say, ask for another promotion. Go get your money. It's my money and I want it. He doesn't ask for more opportunity. No. He asks for wisdom. Because when wisdom comes, you'll know what to do when influence arrives. You wonder how important wisdom is to you. Solomon says in Proverbs 4:7, at the beginning part of that verse 7, he says, getting wisdom is the wisest thing you can do. If you don't want to know what to do, pray for wisdom. Stop praying for your circumstances. This is the dilemma. We're focused about God changing this when God is focused about changing this. Right? We're circumstance driven. We're so driven by circumstance. Our surroundings determine what we do, how we say it, how we respond, how we act, what we feel, the character we carry all day. Your dreams may open doors. Your character may even carry you through hardship, but wisdom will allow you to know and remain where God has taken you to. Man. Perhaps the prayer today is not, God, get me out. Is God, just teach me who I need to be while I'm here. God isn't just simply preparing opportunities for us. He's preparing people. He's preparing us. And when His preparation is complete, you'll discover that the greatest advantage you possess isn't your talent, it isn't your connection, it isn't your opportunity, it's the wisdom that God has given you that enables you to faithfully steward everything that He places in your hands. You're praying for opportunity, and God is trying to change you. We're praying for destinations, and God is trying to redeem us. Joseph spends 13 whole years asking questions he could not get the answers to. But when he looked back, every pit, every prison, every disappointment had become a classroom where God was developing the wisdom that He would use to save an entire nation.